Hello. Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem? I can't flirt, so I have to do that. Okay, 4 questions. Best and worst comments ever received. I struggled a bit with that question for the positive part because I've received so many wonderful comments over the years. It's hard to pick one, and if you'll forgive me, I'll pick a comment that actually was not really a comment but was sent to me back in the day that YouTube had its own internal messaging, like private messaging system. And I'll abbreviate it a little bit, but it boiled down to something like, I really appreciate your videos, and I'm chronically ill. I wake up every morning dreading to discover what functions I have lost overnight, and I really love your videos because they provide me with a bit of distraction, and I particularly like the ones with the Professor and Lord Windermere because they always make me laugh. And even now, that comment has stood out to me and has stayed with me because I found it so touching. Because what that person told me was, you make a difference in my life, right? And I certainly don't approach that from a viewpoint of arrogance, but to the contrary, from a viewpoint of humility, that I am allowed to do the silly stuff I do online with my antics and my bad puns and my weird accents and my stupid voices and dressing up as a professor with a stuffed lobster for a pet, and then entertain people who value that, and in some cases apparently find that really makes a difference in their lives, is amazing, and something that has truly always stood with me. I've always kept that comment with me because it left such an impression. I received that very early on. That really must have been something like 2012. If it was 2013, it was late. So it's a long time ago, and that one still stood with me. My channel was much smaller then. It was a lot less of a thing than it is now, and I found that very impressive. Yeah, so that's probably the best comment, and I've received many very kind and sweet and heartwarming comments over the years, but that one really that stuck with me. Worst comment. Do you want me to list them chronologically or alphabetically? I can certainly come up with a lot, but one that really stood out to me was in reference to the startup sound that I use in my videos. Not the consult the. Oh, actually, no, not the consult the doctors. I don't have a startup for that, but for the regular reviews. That sound that a lot of people ask about is a short sample of Greek Orthodox, so Byzantine chant. I'm not Greek Orthodox, but I really like Orthodox church music. Listen, everyone has an interesting facet to their personality or something. That's one of mine. I have loved that for years. There is a whole story to that. I won't bother you with that because this is not the time and place, but leave a question if I need to elaborate on that. And so I thought it would be fun to have a short reflection of that part of me in the videos at the startup. So I've used that almost since the beginning, if not since video number 1. I very early on that started. And someone commented on a video, and this is many years ago. I don't even remember what video it was. But the comment I can reproduce almost verbatim, I think, ran, "What the hell are you using Islamic music for? Americans are beheaded to this music. This is why The United Kingdom will always be America's bitch, you pommy bastard. There's a lot to unpack there. Ignorance, lack of education and knowledge, and overall stupidity for sure. Not to mention racism and blatant xenophobia. But having said all that, I don't even know where to start. It's not Islamic music. There is no Islamic religious music that I'm aware of. There's the adhan, which is recited, from the minarets to announce prayer time. That's not music, that's a recitation. But here's the biggest question. What if it was Islamic? So what? I have many Islamic friends in this community. And what you were saying is really highly offensive on so many different levels. I don't know what to tell you. Not only are you blatantly wrong, but it's just xenophobic and exclusive and, excluding, racist and offensive and really weird. I'm also not British. The accent may fool a casual passerby, but anyone from the UK probably say, you're not one of us, you're different, innit? So, I've been called a lot worse than pommy bastard, I will say that. But, yeah, that was weird. Anyway, that was that. Surely one of my favorite negative ones because it displayed such blatant ignorance. Okay, next question. Outside of common filling systems like cartridge converter, vacuumatic, one-way shutter valve, eyedropper, bulk filler, what's your favorite filling system? Well, if those are the common ones, piston filler was not mentioned, I think. I don't know what remains. So let me say that I'm not trying to ridicule the person who asked the question, but that in my mind that kind of those are the filling systems. So let me say this about it. Eyedropper is my least favorite because I know myself, and in the words of Clint Eastwood, man's got to know his limitations. I know that at some point I'm accidentally going to unscrew the section and there will be ink everywhere. So I like that least. One-way shut-off valve pens like the Miki Emperor, Denitrios, a lot of Japanese pens have that. Still eyedropper, but you have the one-way shut-off valve, which makes me feel a little safer. So I like that more. Vacuumatic fillers I think are fun. Bulk fillers I think are fun. Cartridge converter is easy to clean. I simply don't know, common or not common, whether I have a favorite filling system, because I feel that different pens have different filling systems, and that's what makes them so interesting. So I don't know if I can point at one and say, that's my favorite. They all have advantages and disadvantages. Bulk filler, great system, large ink capacity, can be disassembled completely, but you have to buy the wrench separately. Yeah. Piston filler, nice, large capacity, can be harder to clean if you can't disassemble it. Eyedropper, shut-off valve, I've kind of talked about. Vacuumatic, fun, but if anything breaks, it can be tougher to replace. So I think every filling system has its pros and cons, and I'm not trying to dodge the question. I just really feel that way. But it depends on what I have. I have a pretty expensive pen here. Lambrou pens LB6, but it's just a cartridge converter filled pen. I would like it if that was a piston filler. I think it would be very cool. But on the other hand, now it's a cartridge converter filled pen and it's really easy to clean. Like that thing's clean in 5 minutes. Whereas some piston fillers can take a very long time. So that's what I'm going to stick with. It really depends on the pen. And different pens will have different filling systems. And as long as I like the pen, I'll probably also like the filling system because there's always some sort of pro to that system. Okay, here's a good question that sounds simple but is not. Does the width of a nib affect handwriting? For example, fine versus broad? Shortest answer, yes, but I think it's maybe the other way around. I think it's better to try to match the nib to the handwriting than to look at this as the nib affects the handwriting. But let me say this about it. From the great book Fountain Pens by Peter Tweidel, I got the tip. He comes from a family that had a fountain pen store. That they always had someone write a lowercase e. And if the bowl of the E was filled in with ink, then that nib grade was too wide for that person, which is a good test. Do it with your own pen. See when it works, when it doesn't work anymore. I have fairly large handwriting, and as a result, I like to use somewhat broader nibs. But I once met Sven at a pen show early on in my pen reviewing career, and he only had broad nibs and italic nibs and oblique nibs, actually italic, broad and oblique nibs, and I hadn't really used a broad nib at that point, and he said, well, look, here's the thing, always buy a broad nib. If you can't use a broad nib, then practice until you can, which was obviously joking, but I kind of took that to heart, and you practice with it and it works. Now, that's not really the question you asked. You have that first thing of the E, see how that nib grade matches your handwriting. Secondly, I have found, and I have read this too, so I don't think I'm the only one who feels this way, that people who have nicer handwriting are better suited with a finer nib. And if you don't have great handwriting, if you use a broader nib, that covers up some of the sins in your handwriting. And that's definitely something that has helped me out in the past, given my handwriting. With a very fine nib, every little error, every little mistake in your handwriting, spideriness, etc., stands out more. So usually the recommendation is, if your handwriting is not great, maybe go for something a little broader, but not filling in the bowl of the E. So from that perspective, I would say that is absolutely something that you should bear in mind about handwriting and nib grades. Having said that, yes, of course, a nib grade can affect your handwriting. As I just said, if you use a double or a triple broad nib, your handwriting will have to be bigger, because if you make it microscopic, it's just going to look like squiggles. You're not going to be able to read anything. So from that perspective, sure, the nib grade also affects the handwriting, right? So that's what I have. That's what I would say about that. I hope that's an answer to your question. The final question, and I'm really going to try to keep this a little brief, is in one of my last Consult the Doctors, that was episode 45, I think, I talked about some personal things by request. And I alluded there to lessons learned about being a content creator. And this person asked, could you elaborate on that? I certainly can. And what I will say here is this. When I'm going to speak about lessons learned about the pen world, I don't only have positive things to say. So if you don't really like to hear this kind of stuff, then this might be a good moment for you to tune out. No offense taken, for sure. Speaking of things I've learned from being in the pen world is this. I'll preface this in the kindest way I can. The pen world is filled with many wonderful people. 100%. That's really true. However, in my mind, the pen world is split into two. There are what I call active consumers and passive consumers. Passive consumers are people who just love pens, and they buy pens and they use their pens and they go to pen clubs maybe or not, and that's fine. Maybe they occasionally post a picture of their pen on Instagram or on Facebook, and that's pretty much it. I may, participate in discussions and forums, etc., but they don't really create content beyond that. And then there are active consumers, and active consumers in the pen world are people like me and many others, right, who create content of some kind. Often YouTube reviews, that's become very popular, but that could also be very active on Instagram, like really having an account dedicated to Instagram. I'm thinking of Aiden, for example, who does a lot of really nice flex nib stuff on Instagram. Then you're also an active consumer. And what I have found, if you hear weird knocking, that's because of the wind. You hear that? Maybe not. That makes a fan flap. If you are an active consumer, the pen world changes radically. And all of a sudden, you become privy to things that you are never exposed to if you're just a passive consumer. At no point will you hear me say an active consumer is better or whatever than a passive consumer. It's just two classes, okay? One not better than the other, but the passive consumers, they get to enjoy their pens and maybe go to a pen show and walk around and buy something nice, and that's awesome. But they're not exposed to a side of the pen world that active consumers are. And I want to be very careful in the anecdotes I share here because I don't mean to imply or implicate anyone. But there definitely are unpleasant things that happen in the pen world. When you are an active consumer, you face abuse on a fairly regular basis. And not from random trolls on the internet, but from people in the pen community. Which is odd, but it's the way it is. And that can be very strange. I remember at some point posting something about that on Instagram and someone commenting, well, you cry too much, you're on YouTube, so you'll face abuse. Well, excuse me, I don't sign a contract. I did not sign a contract with YouTube that said if you're on here, you'll be abused on a regular basis. So I feel that I have a right to complain about that. And that person got blocked because I'm not going to have a discussion with you about this. This is, if that's your approach, I'm sorry, then you're not part of this whole thing anymore. So that is definitely something to consider, I would say, that strange things happen. And again, I'm not talking about someone leaves you a comment that says you're ugly. Yeah, that's a troll. He's probably left that comment on 5 other videos that day. It's not that. It's much more personal things. And sometimes it's really abuse. Sometimes it's just things that I find weird. I remember when I got a new video camera, I posted something, yeah, I said that, video camera. I posted something about the megapixels. I don't believe I'd used, maybe I did use a video camera before that. In any case, I don't know much about video cameras. I just use them. But I only use them to record YouTube videos. I'm not a professional videographer or anything. I said something about the megapixels of that camera, but the megapixels actually referred to the photos, like the actual photographs you could take with that camera, not with the video. And what's interesting is that, I posted that on Facebook or something, is that a discussion then ensued on Reddit that I found about quite a bit later, about someone pointing out that in a fairly pedantic manner, yeah, that's not how it works. Like, that's not, like, that's the photo, like, the video camera does not have megapixels like that. So that person chooses to not comment on my Facebook post, does not send me an email, say, hey, Stephen, listen, man, that's actually not how it works. Like, just so you know, like, this is actually how that works. They choose to go on Reddit under an anonymous profile name and open a thread about that. I find that weird. It makes me feel that someone like that, if I would run into them in the pen show, would not have the courage to look me in the eye, but hidden behind a profile that's an anonymous name, then all of a sudden you have that courage. Why? What's the point in taking time out of your day to create a thread like that, where everyone can then start to bitch about how little I know about video cameras? I find that really odd. And there are many, many examples like that. Reddit, I shun. I don't go to Reddit. Such unpleasant things have been said about me there on a very personal level. I see no use to go to the cesspit of the internet, right? And And there are many other things. This is one of the examples of what happens when you are an active consumer. That would not happen to a passive consumer. Another good story is from a fellow blogger who was at a pen show helping someone set up a table, and who overheard two big names in the pen world that, out of sheer kindness, I won't mention, but these are big names, including an author on a book on fountain pens, were deliberately loudly talking as he was helping someone set up a table about bloggers in the pen world who are ruining the pen world for everyone because they come in, they don't know anything, and they're just ruining the fountain pen hobby. Think about that for just a second, that you do that. How petty you are, how pathetic you are. That is what you do. You don't go to someone's face and say, you really are an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. They don't have that courage, but they will sort of sneakily, bloggers, they ruin the whole fountain pen world. While that person is standing there, and they knew damn well who he was. That's also what happens when you're an active consumer. You face that kind of situation. That would not happen to a passive consumer. I will leave it at this, because I can give you probably 5, 10, maybe 15 more stories like that. I don't think it helps to feed into that negativity. But what I will say is, this is the difference between an active consumer and a passive consumer. And again, I'm not saying one is better than the other. But what I will saying is, the experiences of those two groups in the fountain pen community are very different. The passive consumers will think that the fountain pen community is wonderful and everyone is nice and everyone is helpful, but the active consumers know that that is not true. Not everyone is nice, not everyone is kind, not everyone is nice, not everyone is kind, not everyone is helpful, not everyone is sweet, not everyone is like unicorns, just happily flopping around on clouds. It's not like that. The pen community is abusive, toxic, and quite frankly, really pedantic. And that's okay, because most people in the pen community are absolutely wonderful. They really are. But there are those elements, and sometimes they become very vocal. And the pen community typically chooses to not do anything about that, but just continue going. And I'm fine with that. Like we know the bystander effect. We know that people don't speak up. We know all that. So there you go. That is something I've learned about the pen community. And I think the final conclusion for me is, you just have to accept, when you are an active consumer, that whatever you do, it's never good enough. It doesn't matter what you do. The video quality will never be good enough. The audio quality will never be good enough. The quality of the content will never be good enough. You as a person will never be good enough. It doesn't matter, because you always fail. So how you handle that, how I handle that, is think back to the many positive comments. And that's what I started off with, right? You think back to the person whose life you did touch in a positive way. You think back to the people who do send you kind emails, kind messages, kind private messages on Instagram, who leave kind and wonderful comments on your work, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Facebook, whatever it is. And at the end of the day, you have to learn to close yourself off from that negativity, because it is in many ways a toxic community. For professional reasons, I will not talk about this, but I am also privy to things that happen between pen companies. I'm not talking at the level of Mont Blanc. I'm talking about smaller, like, how do I put that? Bigger, smaller companies, if that makes sense. Like companies that do produce pens, but not at the level of a Mont Blanc or a Pelican in output, but companies that do represent themselves at pen shows, that tune nibs at pen shows, etc. I won't give any details, but there are many, many unpleasant and negative things that happen between those companies too. Not all of them, but there certainly are negative and unpleasant stories there, which is incredibly tragic and sad, because that is another example of the pen world not being nice, about people being amongst themselves, very mean, very unkind, spreading rumors about each other. Like it's very disturbing. And a passive consumer might not notice any of that stuff because they're not privy to that. And sometimes I am made privy to that by companies themselves, who sometimes reach out to me and say, did you know, I just want to let you know this and that happened between us. I'm not expected to do anything. Sometimes I hear this, sort of through the grapevine. Sometimes they contact me directly. But there is all that stuff going on as well. It's the way it is. Now let me conclude on a positive note, because I certainly don't want to make this super negative. But it's a reality. It's a reality that we face. And I assume that it's the same in any type of hobby that you can have. There's always people who are pedantic, who know everything better than you. And that's all fine. I'm now at a stage where it doesn't really bother me anymore. I know it happens. I still get if I see something really negatively personally about me written as a person. Sorry about that interruption. My battery cut out. My camera ceased to record. This is like a couple seconds, but I do have to finish this. So when I see something negative written about me as a person, I don't care if you call me ugly, or that just rolls off your back. But when people get very detailed about everything I'm doing wrong and how stupid I am, all that stuff, I'm going to be frank. It's hard not to let that affect you. And I am now at a stage which has taken me a long time. I've been doing this for over a decade, and that's about as long as this has taken me, right? I am now at a stage where I think, okay, it gives me that flash of annoyance, but it passes and you let it go. And that's it. Again, on the whole, the pen community really is nice. But as an active consumer, you're exposed to things that passive consumers are not always exposed to. And the reason that I point that out is passive consumers are often not aware of these things happening behind the scenes, but they do. And it's hard for content creators to deal with that sometimes. Some people have quit over that kind of stuff. So the final thing that I wanted to say is just really meant as kind advice. But if you have a content creator that you follow and whose work you really like, let them know. I'm not fishing for compliments. Listen, I'm at a stage now, I have like 58,000 subscribers. I know they like what I do. It's fine. But for us, hearing that we're doing something well is incredibly important, because that's what keeps us going. Again, this is not fishing for compliments. What I'm just saying, if you follow that person, let her know that you love her work, and that is why. If you really like what he does, let him know, because it gives us that boost of, okay, we're appreciated. Because I can guarantee you, every content creator, just talking in the pen world, faces this kind of negativity. And it happens a lot more often than you may think. And it can be detrimental, and it can be hard for people to deal with. But you can counter that with positive stuff. And that doesn't mean you have to leave lovey-dovey comments on every single video or every single post that someone makes, but once in a while, take 5 minutes to send someone a message or leave a comment and say, you know what, I just love what you're doing. And I have found myself doing that to content creators, not necessarily in the pen world, but I have other interests. And once in a while you reach out to them and you say, hey, I just love what you do. I don't need a response to this. I'm just saying, like, wonderful. You made my day with this video. It was super funny, or it was really informative, or I've learned a lot from this. And most of the time you get responses back from people along the lines of, awesome, thanks. I really appreciate it, right? Because it matters. It matters to us. And there you go. Okay. More than enough talk. Sorry about the weird splice there. I hope this was useful. Gladly see you later. It really is a nice community overall. Okay? It really is. See you next time.